Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you hail from. I'm the Reverend Dr. Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute at Yale Divinity School. The YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's gathering entitled How Young Minds Navigate Social Interaction from Infancy to Childhood with Dr. Yu-Jung Choi. If this is your first event with us, welcome. If we're well known to you, welcome. We are delighted that you are here with us. For our time today, Dr. Choi will speak to us, then we'll have a brief Q&A session at the end of her presentation. We ask that you please remain muted throughout our time together, except when asking questions. We'll also be monitoring the chat window, so if you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to type it in there at any time. Our office has a great staff, and I'd like to introduce them to you quickly and thank them. The Youth Ministry Institute falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS, so we're blessed to have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director of the center, and Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator for the center as well. Thank you both for being here, for all you do, and more importantly, for who you are. If you are new to the Yale Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a free moment. That's yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there. We have curricula for your youth, training modules for youth leaders, discussion fora, over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by the world's leading youth ministry experts. We have resources for anti-racism work, for youth working through mental health challenges. We have mission and outreach endeavors, links to other articles and materials. There's a whole lot on there, and all of that is available for free, so please do check out our website. This is our fourth gathering for this year's Lunch Lab series at the YMI. We'll be taking some time in the next season looking ahead, and we invite you to add Wednesday, March 4th and Wednesday, April 8th to your calendars. On March 4th, we'll welcome Brandy McDonald, a local children's ministry practitioner, to speak to us about how their congregation has fostered involvement of children in worship leadership. And on April 8th, we will hear from the Reverend Peter Levenstrong, an Episcopal priest who has developed a rather innovative approach for intergenerational worship with a focus on children as co-creators in that space. Registration information for those events can be found on our website, and we'll post them in the chat here too. All of our webinar endeavors for this coming year are sponsored jointly by the YMI and the national setting of the United Church of Christ denomination, and we're so thankful to have the UCC as our partners in this important work. The United Church of Christ Love of Children program was recently awarded a $1.25 million grant through the Nurturing Children Through Worship and Prayer initiative by the Lilly Endowment. Through this program, the UCC has committed to an intentional 4-year-long period to research the state of children's ministry, equip ministry leaders to make meaningful changes to include children in the life of the church, creating resources and strengthening relationships among clergy and other volunteers, and doing all of this for the benefit of our youngest members and friends. One such way the love of children is living out its purpose is through this partnership with us at the YMI to create 6 educational webinars each year around some pressing areas in children's ministry. Some of the topics therein include things like childhood development, storytelling with youth, tending to parents, children in worship, trauma-informed ministry with children, fostering justice work and prophetic action in young people, intergenerational ministry, the whole 9 yards. If you would like to hear more about the Love of Children initiative, please visit the website and we'll post that in the chat too. One final announcement before I turn things over to Dr. Choi. The Yale Youth Ministry Institute is the proud creator of Yale Divinity School's first ever certificate program in youth ministry leadership development. I know many of you on this call today are children's ministry practitioners, but as we all know, children end up becoming youth, and the ministries from one flow to the other. So this program is something I wanted to mention to you all. It's a 9-month-long certificate program focusing on things like organizational systems theory, mental health and spiritual care for young people, and empowerment and justice work with youth. Participants hear from experts in those areas across the country and across the globe, and then we work together to apply these things to what we see in our ministry settings. This program is a cohort-based model where community building and mutual learning are prioritized. And the program includes both the asynchronous material and synchronous together class time where we learn from each other and we grow together in this very weird and very wonderful calling that is youth ministry. Applications are now open for the third year of our program, which will begin this coming fall, and we'll post that link in the chat as well. And now it's my pleasure to introduce all of you to Dr. Choi. Dr. Yoo-Jung Choi is an assistant professor in the School of Psychological and Behavioral Sciences at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, where she directs the Social Cognitive Development Lab. She earned her PhD in psychology from the University of Missouri and completed postdoctoral training here at Yale University and also at Harvard University. Her research focuses first on how infants and young children understand others' minds, and second, on how this understanding and other social capacities, such as moral reasoning, intergroup cognition, and language comprehension, contribute to their interpretation of and engagement in social interactions. By examining these processes across various social cues, her work aims to offer insight into the developmental mechanisms underlying social understanding, which, as we all know, is foundational in the life of the church in these days. Dr. Choi, welcome. We are honored and thrilled to have you here, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much for the great introduction, Jill. Let me just share my screen first, and then here we go. Okay. So I'm really excited and honored to be here and to share my work with everyone here. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Yes? Okay. So I'll be talking about how social understanding emerge early in life and also how they are gradually become more sophisticated throughout the childhood. Okay. So I want to start my talk with Aristotle's quote. So Aristotle said, "We are social animals by nature." So he is the very first philosopher who suggests the idea that we humans are inborn social animals. Then the thing on our own, except lean on our parents or caregivers. I mean, of course, babies are cute, but babies only spend their time like eating, sleeping, pooping, and crying. So some people think that babies are just a little cute crying blob. But that raises an interesting question. What do babies actually know? What do babies actually can do? And what do they still need to learn? And more broadly, what do babies already understand about becoming social competent beings like others, we eventually grow into? So as Aristotle said, we are social animals. So we live in groups and constantly seek out interactions with one another in our daily lives. And through social interactions, we learn, teach, share knowledge, and transmit cultural practices. So social interactions allow us to initiate new relationships and develop and maintain existing ones and even change or terminate undesirable relationships. Therefore, understanding social interactions is essential to exploring the nature of humans as social beings. So as adults, understanding and participating in social interactions comes relatively easily to us. I hope so. But how do we get to this point? From birth. Babies are immersed in social situations in which they observe others' interactions and begin engaging in simple social exchanges themselves. So the question is, how much do infants and children understand about these different stages of social interactions, and how does this understanding develop over time? So let's talk about the first stage, so the initial stage. So if you had a chance, like the picture on the slide, like among many people, you know no one there. Who would you want to interact with? Who you need to say something, right? You need to find someone to talk to. Then what made you initiate a social interaction? So among there's all the different possible kind of factors, I would say social preferences maybe plays a particularly important role, especially at the very beginning of social interaction. So we tend to start interacting with people we like or feel drawn to, or those with a favorable appearance, voice, attitude, personality, and so on. So this leads to a central question. So how are these social preferences formed and how do they develop? I mean, one of the most commonly studied factors that influences our social preferences is similarity. So for example, when you go on a blind date, I guess, one of the first thing or one of the most things that you probably gonna do is looking for similarities between yourself and your date, right? Keep asking, what do you do? What do you like? What do you like to eat, right? So this leads to another question, like how does this understanding of similarity emerge? And how does it develop over time? So in experiment 1 and 2, I'll talk about how infants and children understand social preferences based on shared similarities. And then I'd like to move on to the different stages of social interactions. So this is the stage where relationship develop, change, or even come to an end. So one key factor that plays a role in driving these stages are social evaluation. Like for example, if you found out that your friends had done something wrong or something bad, would you still be able to maintain the same relationship with a friend? So in the next two experiments, I'll talk about how infants form expectations about how others will interact based on their social evaluations of others' behaviors. Okay? And last, group membership also plays an important role across all stages of social interactions. So in experiment 5 and 6, I'll explore how group membership influences different stages of social interaction. So let's talk about shared similarity first. So the relationship between similarity and liking is one of the most firmly established phenomena in social psychology. So indeed, the developmental literature also provides evidence that infants and children choose their own social partner based on shared similarities. But when we say shared similarities, it it includes a lot of different types of similarities. So I've grouped these cues into three broad categories. So the first group, like first similarity group, consists of social cues. So these are based on relatively stable social identities that are often seen as difficult to change, such as gender, race, and language. So among these cues, I focused on language because preference for others who speak the same native language or same native accent emerge really early in our lives. So even infants as young as 5, they prefer to look at or are more willing to learn from or are more likely to accept a toy offered by the speaker of their native language or native accent compared to those who speak the foreign language or have a foreign accent. So that's the social cue. But the second group consists of psychological cues. So these involves overlapping likes that signal shared evaluations or attitudes or preferences and so on. So previous research suggests that by around 11 months of age, infants prefer others who share their toy preference or food preference. And the last cue is the behavior cue. So these are the behavior coordination signals, such as like synchrony and imitation. So there's a lot of cute studies out there. So by 9 months of age, infants prefer and show greater prosocial behavior towards individuals who imitate them or move in synchrony with them. They cannot move by themselves, but with the mom's arm or the, like direct by mom, they just move in synchrony with the experimenter. They're more likely to help the experimenter compared to the experimenter who moves in synchrony. So overall, these studies demonstrate that both babies and children use similarity cues to guide their own social preferences. However, the third-party social preference inferences are also critically important. Like by monitoring others' choices and interactions, individuals can map the broader social structure and like predict future alliances and navigate like a group dynamics more effectively. Then can infants and children use different kinds of similarity cues to understand others' social preferences? I mean, even though this question is important, there are relatively few studies that have explored it, and research in this area is inconsistent with findings like varying across different types of cues. So my goal is to examine whether infants and children use similarity cues such as shared language, liking, and movement to reason about other social preferences within a unified experimental framework. So more specifically, I ask which cues are more effective and how their use of these cues changes across development. Okay? So let me start with the experiment one. So we recruited 54 infants between 7 to 14 months olds, and they were randomly assigned to one of the three conditions: language condition, liking condition, and movement condition. So specifically in the language condition, we use Mandarin Chinese, which is the syllable timed, and German, which is a stress timed, because these languages belong to different rhythmic classes. So this distinction helps babies discriminate between the two easily. So importantly, none of the infants in the language condition had prior exposure to either Mandarin Chinese or German. So it's a foreign language to them. It's unfamiliar to them. So in every condition, infants saw two familiarization videos presented twice, so 4 familiarization trials in total, and they saw 2 test trials. Let me explain those things in detail. So during formulation trials, I told you that there are 2 types of formulation trials, and then the infants saw 3 actors. So as you saw it on the screen, the target actor in the blue, who's in the middle, and the similar actor in the purple, and the dissimilar actor is in pink. So the target and similar actor shares one key attribute. So for example, in the language condition, as you can see from the screen, the target and the similar actor spoke the same foreign language, in this case Chinese, while the dissimilar actor spoke German. And in the liking condition, the target and similar actor show the preference for the same toy. So between the hedgehog and the lion, they both prefer the hedgehog rather than lion, while the dissimilar actor preferred the lion. And in the movement condition, the target and the similar actor made the same movement, but the similar actor made a different one. So as I mentioned earlier, infants saw 2 familiarization videos. So the only difference between these 2 events was the order. So in one familiarization trial, the target act first, followed by the similar and then dissimilar. And in the other event, the target again acted first, and then the dissimilar goes next and similar. So this design allowed infants to directly compare how both similar actor and the dissimilar actor related to the target. And the positions and the roles of similar actor and dissimilar actor, as well as the shared language, preference, or movement, were counterbalanced across babies. Let me show you the video how babies actually looked at. Okay? So in the language condition, this is one of the famous events in the language condition.
Wenn man zu viel herumrennt,
Did you hear the sound? No. Did you hear it? Oh, okay. Sorry.
ist man schnell erschöpft.
如果你总是跑来跑去，你会精疲力尽。
Obst und Gemüse zu essen ist eine richtig gute Angewohnheit für deinen Körper.
So to eliminate accent-related confounds, 2 Mandarin Chinese and 2 German native speakers stopped all speech. So they all look Caucasians. Make sure the skin color make sure skin color is not the confounding variable in this case, and then we dub the sounds afterwards. Okay? And this is the liking condition.
Ew, I don't like this. Ooh, I like this.
Ew, I don't like this.
Ooh, I like this.
Ew, I don't like this. Ooh, I like this.
Okay, and the last one, the movement condition. Okay, so finally, babies in all conditions saw the same test events. So in the similar event shown on the left, the target chose a similar actor and interacted positively with her. In the dissimilar event shown on the right, the target chose a dissimilar actor and interacted positively with her. And let me show you one of the test events. Look how it looked like. So she looked at both and then choose one of them and say hello. And interact positively. I hope it's positive. And then we measure their looking times from that. So this is a prediction. So in the language condition, if infants use shared language, even when it's a foreign to them, to make predictions about the target's social preferences between the two actors, then they should expect the target to prefer the similar actor over the dissimilar actor, right? So as a result, during the test phase, they should rely longer at the dissimilar event because that is the unexpected and more surprising. So we use a paradigm called violation of expectation method. So if baby expect that the target should choose a similar actor, when they see something unexpected or surprising, they should look longer. We use that paradigm. So that's why we expect them to look longer at the dissimilar than similar. Does it make sense? Okay. So likewise in the liking and movement condition, if shared toy preferences and shared movement also support inferences about other social preferences, infants should again look longer at the dissimilar than at the similar, right? That's our prediction. Then let's look at the results. So in this graph, the x-axis shows the two test events and y-axis shows the infant's looking time. So in the language condition, infants looked significantly longer at the dissimilar event than the similar event as we expected, right? So this indicates that they were able to differentiate between the two foreign, unfamiliar languages, and also they used the similarity cues to predict whom the target would prefer to interact with. Interestingly, in the liking condition, infants look in the opposite direction, but they looked significantly differently. So this suggests that they were at least able to differentiate between the two test events based on the actor's toy preferences. But this pattern of response was different. So sometimes in the domain of social cognition, when situations are more complex or ambiguous, babies often prefer to look at familiar or more easily interpretable events rather than unfamiliar or confusing ones. So in this case, maybe positive interaction between individuals who share like a similarity are more expected or desirable. So this pattern suggests that maybe for infants, shared preference may be a little bit weaker or less salient than shared language when inferring social relationships, which is very unexpected, but it's still significant. So, and the last condition is movement. And interestingly, they looked about equally. So this means that behavior cue, like a movement cue, are kind of like weaker than the other two cues. So in guiding babies' expectation about social relationships. Then how about children? So this experiment was led by my graduate student, Alicia Cooley, and we recruited 144 children between 4 and 8, and they were randomly assigned to one of the three conditions like babies, and then they watched the same four familiarization videos, and then they can, understand words and they can answer verbally. So they were asked to answer two target questions at the end. So let me explain the questions here. So the first question was, we directly asked them, between these two actors, who do you think the woman in blue like to play with? Okay, so we asked them to choose. It was the first choice question. So importantly, unlike babies, children can respond verbally. So we examine the extent to which these inferences depend on children's explicit identification of similarity cue. So to do this, we included a second question, the similarity identification question. So we asked, who do you think that spoke the same language as the woman in the blue shirt? Or who do you think that liked the same toy as the blue shirt? Or who do you think moved in the same way? So the purpose of this similarity identification question was to assess whether children remembered who shared similarity with whom. And this also allows us to examine whether this explicit identification of similarity cue is necessary for children to infer other social preferences. Okay? And let me show you the results. Ta-da! Unexpectedly, language condition. So that this graph shows the percentage of children who chose a similar actor in response to the test questions. So unlike infants in experiment 1, shared language did not appear to play a role in children's inferences about other social preferences. Children did not choose a language-matched actor above chance level, and they also showed relatively low accuracy in identifying similarity. I mean, there's a lot of possible reasons why, but I would say one possibility is that maybe based on their experiences, children may not view language as a reliable cue for inferring other social preferences. Like, for example, a recent study by Email and Lieberman 2024 found that even infants with greater exposure to linguistic diversity were more likely to expect that people who speak different languages could share the same food preferences, which means that children, as children grow and then they gain more experience with linguistic diversity, they may become more open to the idea that people who speak different languages can still be socially affiliated. Even though the children in our language condition were all monolingual, we made sure everyone is monolingual, but they may have learned through social media or other everyday experiences that speaking a different language does not necessarily mean that you cannot interact with them. But that's my speculation. It doesn't supported by the evidence, so future research has to explore this question. And interestingly, and by the way, none of the previous study tested language condition, shared language with children. So this is kind of new. And unlike what we saw in the infants data from experiment 1, children in our study, in this condition, like a liking condition, did not seem to use shared liking cue in the robust way to infer other social preferences. This is also surprising as well. However, as you can see in the similarity identification results, the yellow bar, the 75% of children correctly remembered who shared the toy choice with whom. And among those 75% of children, 69% of children chose the similar actor as a target's preferred partner, which is significantly above chance. So this suggests that children's inferences about social preferences based on shared liking or disliking of toys relied on explicit identification of the shared preference. The most interesting one is this one. Different from babies, children in the movement condition were able to identify the target's preference, as shown in the blue bar. So this indicates that children, unlike babies, were able to use shared movement cues to infer other social preferences. Like interestingly, children did not reliably remember who performed the same movement as the target. They kind of like a fail. It's about the chance level. So this contrasts with the liking condition, where explicit identifying who shared a liking was important for inferring the target's preference. But in the movement condition, successful inferences did not depend on the explicit identification. So it's a really interesting and then different results, from infancy to childhood based depending on the similarity cues. So these results suggest that children process similarity cues differently based on the type of cue. So overall, what these findings suggest is that infants and children do not rely on similarity cues in the same way when inferring others' social preferences. So for babies between 7 and 14, shared language was a very strong cue, but by childhood, between age 4 to 8, the influence of language clearly declined. And we see the opposite pattern for movement. Shared movement was the weakest cue for babies, but it became the strongest cue for children. So taken together, these results suggest that the process of using similarity to reason about other social preferences changes with development, and that this process depends on the type of similarity cue involved. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next section. So let's talk about how social evaluation influences the development and termination of social interactions. Let's talk about the second part. So in social world, we constantly gather information to evaluate one another. Like for example, whether someone is nice or not. We observe everyone's behavior every day, and then we try to update, evaluation or reputation about the person. But these evaluations influenced how we treat others, like for example, whether to approach or stay away from the person, but how we understand others and also how we understand others' interactions. But unfortunately, this information we can use is not always accurate because we are not able to observe all the events about others. We cannot monitor one person 24 hours, right? To make sure he or she or them is okay or sound or things like that. So the information could be limited. So when using limited information, we may hold false beliefs about others and form erroneous evaluations. So these evaluations in turn affect our social interactions for sure. So let's think about this situation. So there are Bill and Andrew. Bill is in red and Andrew is in green, and they always play together. And one day, Bill hits Charlie. Okay? So if Andrew sees this crime, and Andrew may change how he interacts with Bill, right? Because now Andrew knows that the Bill is a bad guy. But if Andrew does not see Bill's transgression, Andrew will falsely believe that he is still nice and he will still play with Bill. So to understand this situation, both social evaluation skills, like hitting is bad, and psychological understanding, like whether Andrew saw this event or not. So that's why, which means that Andrew has a true belief or false belief about Bill, right? So these two abilities are necessary to make sense of this situation. So recent research shows that these two social cognitive capacities emerge very early in our lives. So social evaluation skills, which may form a foundation for morality, also appears early in life. Like previous studies suggest that infants as young as even 3 months can distinguish between prosocial and antisocial agents and prefer the prosocial agents over the antisocial agents. Like for example, as you see on the slide, when infants watch a red circle trying to climb up a hill, and they prefer a yellow triangle that helps the circle reach the top over blue square that hinder the circle by pushing it, back down the hill. And in addition, more recently, though still controversial, evidence suggests that infants may also have some understanding of others' false beliefs. So, building on these findings, experiment 3 and 4 were designed to examining how infants make sense of social interactions using these two cognitive capacities. So, in this experiment, 48 13-month-olds participated, and they were randomly assigned to one of the three conditions: a true belief condition, a false belief condition, and accidental condition. So I'm going to explain all these things in detail in a minute. And then the male infants, boy puppets, and the female infants, girl puppets. So all boys and girl puppets depicted Caucasian children to avoid skin color as the confounding variable. So you can see that ABC, ABC on the bottom of the slide. So let me explain the procedure. So in the true belief condition, in all conditions, they receive the same formalization trials, like 4 formalization trials. So infants first, so in one event, in one of the formalization event, the two puppets, I would say they're gonna, I will call them A and B. So A, B clapped hands synchronously and then turned to face each other and wiggled as if laughing together. And in the other event, A and B hopped together and turned to face each other and wiggled as if laughing together. So their actions were repeated until the end of trials, and then presenting that they are kind of like a happy playing together. Okay? And then infants receive a single orientation trial during the trial. A's head, you see the red in the red circle, and the upper body was visible through the window. So A can watch but not intervene because of the curtain. So B and the new character C, who's in the blue shirt, blue pants, on the apparatus floor. So while A was watching, the new puppet C walked towards B, who was looking at C, and when C got close, B hit C, and C fell down. Let me show you the video. So we made sure it's not too horrible. So we decided to hit the hand, not the body. So I hope it's not too violent. Okay. Okay, so then all babies were given 2 pairs of test trials alternating between the together and alone events involving only A and B. Okay, so no C. So at the start of each test trial, A was outside of the apparatus, right? So A returned and then walked towards B. So in the together event, B and A turned to each other and laughed, as in formalization trials. And then 2 puppets turned to face 2 babies and sway synchronously. And the alone event was similar, except that A stood face the baby during the whole trial. It looks like A seemed to ignore B. So B is trying to, let's play with me. And then, seems like A kind of ignore. So half of the babies saw the together first, and the other half saw the alone event first. Let me show you the together event. Okay, so that's a together event, and this is alone event. Oh, sorry, it's again together event. Sorry, this is again alone event. Okay, so the other conditions, everything is the same except for the orientation trials. Okay, so the false belief condition was similar to the true belief condition, except that A was absent. So A did not witness B's transgression towards C. The accented condition was similar to the true belief condition, except that during orientation, B faced away and accidentally hit C while stretching arms. So the main rationale behind of this ex-ante condition is to examine whether infants can take into account B's intention to interpret B's antisocial behavior. So we hypothesize that if infants in the true belief condition expected A to change his interaction with B after seeing B's transgression, then they should respond with heightened interest to the together, which is unexpected and surprising event, right? You know B is a bad guy. Why you on earth play with B again, right? They are surprised at this together. But in the false belief condition, since A did not witness B's transgression and hold the same belief about B, that B was still okay to play with, infants should expect A should still interact with B, hence looked longer at the alone event, even though baby themselves knew B's bad guy, right? And last, the outcome of B's actions was the same in the true belief condition and the eccentric condition, but if infants were sensitive to B's intention, then the two conditions should yield different results, right? So you guys follow me? Okay. And that's what we found actually. So on the x-axis, you can see the different conditions, and on the y-axis, you can see the mean looking time. So as predicted, infants in the true belief condition looked relatively longer at the together than the alone, and infants in the false belief condition looked the opposite way, and infants in the eccentric condition looked about equally at both events. So when A and B interacted in a positive manner, when A did not witness B's transgression, 13-month-olds, even 13-month-olds, expected them to continue doing so, even though they themselves saw B hit C, right? However, if A was present and witnessed B's transgression, infants expected A to change his behavior and ignore B. So furthermore, if it appears that B hit C accidentally with A present, babies did not have clear expectations, presumably, because they seem to take B's intentions into consideration. Otherwise, there's no other explanation to show the to explain the differences between the true belief and eccentric condition. Then the next question is, how about prosocial behaviors? Like imagine that like Andrew and Bill have never interacted before, and Andrew then watched like Bill behave prosocially towards a third party, Charlie. Like for example, the comforting Charlie. Would that observation change how Andrew treat B? Like when you see someone you never talk to, but notice that person is a really nice person, right? Do you want to, start the interaction with that person? That was the question, basically. So in this study, it's ongoing. So far, 32 infants aged 13-month-olds participated, and the infants were randomly assigned to one of the two conditions, so the true belief condition or the false belief condition. And the FAM trials are similar to those of the experiment 3, except that except that A stood facing the baby during the whole FAM trials. Like only B clap and hops. So A seemed to ignore B. So A do nothing, just looking at babies, like the alone event in the test trial in the experiment 3. But the B claps, hops by self, and time to time look at A. And then in the orientation trial, C, a new puppet C, walks towards the middle of the stage and falls by self. Then B goes close to C and kneels down as if comforting C. So the only difference between true belief and false belief is that whether A is present or not. Okay? And then we show the same for test trials to the babies in this condition. So we predicted that in the false belief condition, since A did not see B's prosocial behavior, so still hold the same belief about him, right? So infants should expect A not to interact with B, so they should look longer when they eventually play together, right? However, there are two possible predictions for the true belief condition. So the first possibility is that infants expect A to change how he interacts with B after seeing B's prosocial behavior towards, like a new third party. So in this case, infants' looking behavior should differ from that in the false belief condition, right? However, there's another possibility. Just think about your own experiences. I mean, we see a lot of nice people every day, right? I mean, we don't necessarily become friends with every nice person we see. I mean, we know, oh, that person is okay, that person is good, right? But it doesn't necessarily that we need to make that start the initiation, start the like interaction with that person, right? So if infants reason this way, then they should show the similar looking time pattern as a false belief condition, right? So that's what we found so far. It's a preliminary results, but if this pattern holds, that it indicates that infants expect A not to interact positively with B even after witnessing B's prosocial behavior towards C. So, as I mentioned earlier, we don't always become friends with every nice person we meet. So perhaps, I mean, but it's important to avoid the bad people, right? It is really important, but we don't necessarily, like a friend with all the nice people we meet. So perhaps infants hold a similar understanding of social relationship as adults, but we need more like a further investigation about that. So if it could be maybe B's comforting behavior towards a third party wasn't strong enough to change A's way of interacting with him. So we are currently running several follow-up conditions to further examine these possibilities, and let me kind of briefly show what I'm planning to. So the first possibility is that the first party prosocial experiences may matter more than third party observation. If someone nice to another, that doesn't mean anything to me. But if someone nice to me, right, helping me, then it matters a lot, right? So this condition would look like this. So after the same FAM trials, now no C, but A falls down by itself, and B is kneel down as comforting A. Okay. And another possibility is that comforting may not be strong enough to initiate new social relationship when no prior relationship exists. So among different types of social behaviors, like we have three pro-social behaviors: helping, sharing, comforting. And then among those pro-social behaviors, comforting is also known to be the last developing forms in infants' understanding. So maybe in the follow-up condition, instead of showing comforting, we present like a direct helping. So if B helps A directly to infants, then expect A to interact with B. Like it looks like this. So it's only A and B. Do you think it's helping? Okay, thank you. All right, so in summary, experiment 3 and 4 provided evidence that 13-month-olds could use both like a perspective taking and social evaluation skills to make sense of other social interactions. So they expect that the agents' antisocial behaviors will change the interaction pattern between two agents, but probably not the prosocial behaviors. We need further investigation about that. So they could take the agent's perspective when predicting the agent's behaviors. But a lot of interesting remains, but one of the interesting questions that I would think of was that how about group membership? So if A and B are in the same group and B is in the different group, even though A hit C, even though B hit C, maybe for A it's okay because C is in the different group. You see what I'm saying? So this brings me to the next experiment. So we're gonna kind of explore how this morality or social evaluation and group membership plays a role together. So in experiment 5 and 6, I will talk about how group membership influences social interactions. So young children already show an understanding of both morality and social group membership. So even by age 3, Children not only evaluate morally wrong behavior as wrong, but also distinguish between moral and conventional transgressions. So they are pretty sensitive towards those actions. And by this age, children also show an understanding of social groups. So even when they are assigned to completely arbitrary groups, like for example, based on meaningless color choice, such as like drawing or a color from a pouch or something like that, children quickly treat that color as the group marker because these groups are not based on like any socially meaningful characteristics. This approach allows us to test children's genuine understanding of social group membership, and previous research suggests that 3 years old already show in-group favoritism, by this randomly assigned group. And so previous research suggests that the 3 and older, show these two capacities. However, these two processes of the capacities have often been studied separately. But in the real life, morality is frequently intertwined with the social group membership, as I mentioned earlier, right? As I give you an example. So therefore, the present study was designed to examine how children respond when moral understanding and social group membership interact. So according to the previous studies, these two, there are the two different kinds of social group understanding children already hold. So the first one is the social group understanding. Like it provides like abstract expectations about how groups constrain social interactions. So children expect moral obligations to hold within rather than between groups. So in group, like a between group harm is okay, but between group help is not acceptable. Like an in-group harm or is not acceptable, or the within group help is acceptable, and things like that. And second, children also show in-group favoritism. So children from age 3 prefer their in-group members over out-group members, even, like a random assignment. So based on all those knowledge, I designed experiment 5. So in this study, 128 children between age 4 to 8 participated. So they were randomly assigned to one of the two conditions, like a within group condition and between group conditions. So the only difference between these two conditions is that they, in the within group condition, they hear stories where the actor and recipient in the same group, and between group condition is the different group. So first of all, children were assigned to one of the two novel, like a minimal group. So the orange group or the green group. So to do this, I show them a bag like containing the 10 orange coins and 10 green coins and ask them to pick one. And they should not look inside. So the color of the coin they selected determined their group. So their group membership. So after that, we place the color coin in front of the child and ask them to wear a shirt matching their group color, and just to remind them of which group they were in. So they were really excited about this procedure. And then we have 4 stories, like 2 pro-social stories and 2 anti-social stories. And after each story, they were asked 3 target questions. And these target questions are like this. So the first question was behavior evaluation question, like would it be right or wrong to, this action? And then do you think that this actor is good or bad? And interaction question is, do you still want to play with or interact with this person or not, right? So in here, let me just give you the story. Just imagine that, you are a child, and then you are randomly assigned to a green group. Okay, so you are in the green group, you are a child, just as a participant, just listen to this story, please. So this is the antisocial story example for the between group condition. So you are in the green group, okay? All right, so I will say, let me introduce you to Ellie. Can you tell me she is in your group or in the other group? Then your answer should be my group, right? And then this is Sophie. Can you tell me if she is in your group or in the other group? The answer should be the other group. Okay, so one day Ellie was walking to the playground and Ellie approached the swings, but all of the swings were taken. So Ellie stood in line behind Sophie. So when it was Sophie's turn, Ellie pushes Sophie out of the way and Sophie fell down on the ground while Ellie sat in the swing. So after that story, children receive the three questions. I slow it down when I give a story to a child, not like this. I know you are all older, so. Okay, so let me show you a real child video. She's 5 years old, and then she heard the exact same story as you are, and then she belonged to the green group, as you can tell from her shirt. Okay. Would it be right or wrong to push someone down?
It will be wrong.
Wrong. Then, how much is it wrong? Little wrong, pretty wrong, or really wrong?
Really wrong.
Really wrong. Okay. And do you think Ellie is good or bad?
Bad.
Bad. How bad is she? A little bad, pretty bad, or really bad?
Pretty bad.
Pretty bad. Okay. And there are blocks. You need to build a tall tower to win. Do you want to work with Ellie to build a tower?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's in my team.
She what?
She's in my team.
Oh, she's your team. Okay. Little want to? Want to? Really want to?
Really like it.
Really want to. Okay. Okay, so this captured a whole story really well. That's why I decided to show it to you. So here's what we found. On the x-axis, you can see the child's age. So from 4 to 9, and on the y-axis, you can see child's evaluation with higher values indicating more positive judgments. So overall, across all three measures, children's responses were strongly driven by the moral valence of the story, right? They evaluate prosocial behaviors and actors shown in red lines positively, and then the antisocial behaviors and actors shown in blue lines negatively. And children were also willing to interact with actors who performed prosocial behaviors and less willing to interact with actors who performed antisocial behaviors. However, we also find a really interesting age differences. The child that you saw was 5 years old, right? So children's sensitivity to moral valence increased with age. You see that the gap between the in each question is widened with age, right? So older children showed a larger evaluation gap between prosocial and antisocial, especially when deciding whether they want to interact with an actor. You see the 4 years old, right? The difference between the prosocial and antisocial actor is not very different from each other, but it's widened like hugely with age. And here the graph breaks down the results by group membership. So x-axis shows the child's group membership and y-axis shows their evaluation. So the graph shows the moral evaluation differed across their group membership, social group membership. So the gap between prosocial and antisocial stories were larger when the actor was an out-group member than when the actor is in-group member in general, across all stories. So when the actors are, out-group members, then they kind of evaluate antisocial, like a story is more worse, and then the prosocial behavior is, is also. So looking more closely, children evaluate antisocial stories, the blue bars, more positively when they were performed by the in-group members than the out-group members, right? So they were more lenient to their in-group members when they evaluate those negative things. In contrast, evaluation of prosocial stories did not differ by group membership. Finally, the group membership had its strongest influence on children's interaction this season, as you can see in this graph in the blue box. Okay. So there's a lot of more information, more detailed results, but I guess you all received the pre-reading the paper. So there's all the details there. So if you have any questions about any results or anything, please let me know. Okay. So in summary, children's moral understanding and their understanding of social group membership plays different roles across the three questions, right? So when evaluating behaviors and actors, children seem to rely on both moral understanding and social group information, but more like a moral understanding. So they are sensitive to whether the action is pro-social or anti-social, but also group membership is also shaped a little bit, like a strongly, those behavior are judged, right? However, when it comes to deciding when they want to interact with the actor or not, then responses appear to depend more heavily on in-group favoritism, as you all saw. So one possibility is that affiliating with an in-group member may be perceived as like a, not affiliating with an in-group member will be perceived as disloyal, which pose a different kinds of concern than simply recognizing that the in-group member behaved badly or wrongly, right? So in this sense, affiliation seems to hold a special status for children, so one that is not like a reducible to more like a evaluation alone, moral evaluation alone. So we also see a clear development state change as well. So overall, older children show more extreme ratings, and they appear the better able to integrating both moral information and social group information when making evaluations and also interaction decisions compared to younger children. Okay, so we are get to the last study. The timing is okay? Okay, good. Okay, so this leads to the next question of like when in-group favoritism first emerged. So it's well documented that children tend to prefer their own group members over others based on various categories of information, including gender, race, and as I mentioned beforehand, right? Children's tendency to prefer their in-group members emerge even when group membership is not defined by culturally meaningful features no. So just like adults, children starting at age 3 demonstrate in-group favoritism even when randomly assigned to unfamiliar and arbitrary social groups. So the question is, when does this in-group favoritism emerge, right? So we observed the in-group favoritism in my previous studies, right? But the next question is, when is it emerged? What's the kind of origin of this understanding or the favoritism, basically? So based on previous research, the answer is that in-group favoritism, especially based on the arbitrary assignment, does not appear to emerge in infancy. Like for example, when 11 half-month-olds were arbitrarily assigned to a group based on the mitten color, so in this case, yellow mitten versus orange mitten, they did not show a preference for an individual. So in this case, the monkeys. So the experimenter assigned a color to a baby and then to the monkeys, and then see whether they prefer the one of the monkeys who liked this, who happened to have the same color of mittens, but they didn't show the preference at all. So this raises an important question. Then what underlies these age differences? 3 years old can, but younger than 3 cannot. Like, why do children age 3 and older show, but not younger than that, right? So there are two possible hypotheses. One hypothesis is that preference for those who share arbitrary features, maybe acquired during first few years of life, through cultural exposure and learning. So they need to learn something about it. So that's why, they were not going to appear before 3. But an alternative hypothesis is that infants are less attentive to arbitrary features than older children, but that there maybe certain conditions under which a preference for those with arbitrary similarity can be elicited, they can maybe do it. So to test this hypothesis, I began thinking about how we might make infants aware of arbitrary group membership. So in other words, when do we actually think about our own group membership? I mean, I'm all members of many different things. I mean, I'm a woman, I'm an Asian, and I'm a part of, this age group. I'm not going to tell my age, but this age group. And I'm a member of psychology department and a member of developmental psychology community. I'm a member of a lot of different things, right? But we don't necessarily think about our membership all the time, right? Unless we need to. When? When do we become aware of our group membership? Under what circumstances do we strongly think about being part of a group? I think one of the most kind of a prominent situation is competition, right? So in these moments, people become more aware of their group membership. And this often leads them to support their own group members more strongly. So competitive contexts have been shown to heighten adult sensitivity to group distinctions and increase in-group favoritism. So this leads to the next question, that does competition lead infants to prefer their arbitrary in-group member over the out-group member? That was the question. Okay. So in this study, 16, 11 half-month-olds participated, and then it's a choice paradigm. Let me go through the procedure in detail here. So first of all, infants were presented with the two colors of scarves and mittens, which is the orange and green. So they were randomly assigned to one of two groups. So identified by either green or orange scarves and mittens. So experimenter comes with these two sets and say, I'm going to give you this green scarf and I'm going to give you a green mitten. And then we're going to ask them to wear mittens and scarves, just to make sure to remind them which group they are in. And then we're going to assign the color to those cats randomly. And then infants watched a 15 seconds video in which the two puppets wearing their group colored clothing competitively struggled over a box. So let me show you the video.
Yay!
Do you think it's competitive enough? And they always end in the middle, so no one won. Okay. And then, and then the choice measure. So the experimenter who was blind to the condition presented both puppets again, and infants were encouraged to choose one of the two puppets. As I mentioned earlier, in the previous study, they used the same method except for the video. There's no video, but they use the same procedure, and then the baby chose randomly between the two. But in our study, they actually significantly prefer the puppet wearing the same color as themselves. So importantly, this finding contrasts with previous findings, as I mentioned beforehand, and this is the very first evidence that infants can show in-group favoritism based on minimal kind of like group assignment. Then, while in-group competition increases sensitivity to group distinctions and in-group favoritism, but intergroup cooperation often has the opposite effect, right? So we use like a cooperation across groups to eliminate like a group biases and all the things, right? So I asked the question: does this a cooperative interaction between the groups diminish the preference for in-group members based on similarity? So in this case, in this study, again, 16, 11 half-month-olds participated, and then the procedure were different. How? Instead of the assignment, infants first asked to choose between the two colors. So it's based on their own preferences. So we present two sets of mittens and scarves, and then which one do you like? And baby need to choose first. And then we ask the puppets, which one do you like? And puppet, oh, I like this. Oh, I don't like this. We kind of do the puppet show in front of the baby. You need to practice your acting skills to become a good developmental psychologist. So, oh, I like that. Oh, I hate that. Things like that, right? And then the experimenter kind of like let them wear those kind of like matched color mittens and scarves. And then they all watch the cooperation video like this. Yay! Okay, so it's 15 seconds. So then they all receive the same test trial. So the experiment, who doesn't know anything about the condition, present the two puppets and then ask them to choose which one do you like. Unfortunately, this is what we found. Different from what I expected, infants still show a tendency to prefer the similar puppet over the dissimilar one. So 11 out of 16 infants chose a similar puppet. Although these results did not reach a significant, like a statistically significance, but it suggests a potential preference for the similar puppet. So it's too strong to, reduce basically. So overall, these results suggest that infants preferences for others who share even arbitrary similarity depend on the broader social context. So competition seems to make a group membership more salient for infants, even for infants, possibly by activating early alliance or affiliation mechanisms, possibly. However, cooperation does not seem to deepen infant's attention to similarity. Maybe this cooperation video wasn't strong enough, maybe the follow studies needed. But together, only based on these results, what I can say is that these results show that infants are already sensitive to cooperation and competition as signals of meaningful group boundaries, even within the first year of life. Remember, they are 11.5 months olds. So, in conclusion, my research examined how infants and children understand social interactions across a range of contexts. So, across these studies, I showed that infants and young children can use similarity cues to predict others' social interactions and social evaluations to reason about how others will interact, and group membership cues to guide their own social preferences. So, taken together, this body of work suggests that even from a very early age, infants are not passive observers. I want to highlight these parts. Instead, they are actively making sense of the social world around them using multiple sources of information to understand relationship, alliances, and social behaviors. So they are not, passive learners, but active learners, I would say. So I want to give thanks to all the babies and children and parents or the caregivers, families who participate in the research, and thank you to all of my collaborators. And also, I want to thank two amazing members of my lab for their support and contribution. So if you have any questions or comments or suggestions after this talk, please feel free to contact me at this email address. Also, if you know any babies or children who might be interested in participating in research, we are always looking for participants. So, we also conduct online studying. So wherever you are, it's okay. So feel free to contact our lab or me. We would be very happy to help them participate. So any questions?
Dr. Choi, this is fascinating. So thank you so much for this. And folks, if you do have a question in the chat, please feel free or if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'll start us off with a couple here. So I'm curious, the main takeaway for me in all of this is that infants are not even remotely passive observers. The connections start very, very young and they're nuanced and they become more complex as children get older. So it makes me wonder too, what exposure looks like for younger children, right? So is there wisdom from the research, is there wisdom in having young children experience a myriad of different environments, social interactions, things like that? I mean, we all know that being social with young kids is positive, but I guess I'm wondering about exposure of different atmospheres and environments and just all of those kinds of things. Does that seem to indicate, you know, and I'm bringing it back to the church world a little bit. So it's hard to bring young kids to church, and most of the folks on this call will name the difficulties in wrangling little kids in a pew or in having them dropped off at a daycare spot in the church, that kind of thing. But it sounds like there's some positive pieces that come from that type of thing. Are you noticing anything about that?
Wow, that's a really hard question. Honestly, I don't have a clear answer to that question. So, in terms of environment factors that children expose, like babies expose, to, are very. I mean, we always say that environment factor plays an important role. And
Yeah.
then, but it's a really hard in what specific environment leads children to, believe in certain ways, because there's a lot of things are intertwined and placed together. So at least, what I can say is that children who grow up in a more diversity environment, we now kind of like a more focus on those kind of like children, those types of like environment factors that leads us to believe that they're more like open to, like the differences basically. So as I mentioned in the talk, right, like who grow up in the more diversity linguistic environment, they're open to accept the idea that, who two different language speak different languages are okay to interact on things like that. And then it's a kind of like a similar, who grow up from the, you know, um, like a more racial diversity family are accept that the, different races doesn't matter. So that's something that I can tell at this moment. But if you have more specific questions, maybe I can think of more. But
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that makes a lot of sense to me. Because if young children are finding ways to understand in-group favoritism, right? And how even
right,
competition, as you noted, increases that kind of sense. You know, what it brings me back to the question of what is the definition of an in-group, right? So if their in-group
mhm.
is bigger at a younger age, maybe we can dispel some of this negative favoritism piece, right? I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah.
I mean that kind of leads me the question, not the question, but thoughts that how we define our in-group members, right? So there's a
Yeah.
lot of theories about children and babies, how they define their in-group members, right? So when they see a new person, do they consider that person as in-group member or out-group member? So, I mean, the language or race or gender, all these things, like make them to believe that they're okay to talk to, maybe they're possibly in your group. But recent kind of theory suggests that babies, especially babies, create those in-group, out-group boundaries based on the caregivers. So if mom talk to someone, then baby think that, oh, that person is in my group. So they kind of like widen, their in-group members based on the, parents or the caregivers kind of like interactions. But there's other theory who's against with against this, saying that, they all consider that it's in-group unless there's two different, like a language different, right? Or the, the appearance difference. Like unless it's a similar to them, they aware that they're consider them as in-group from beginning. So I don't know which one is correct or not, but it's an open question though. But
It requires more research, right? Oh,
yes, of course.
that's always right. But that's
Yes.
really interesting. Okay, yeah, because that has major impacts, I think, on how we interact with young kids
Hmm.
in the church world and in any world in which we inhabit. But helping little ones in particular understand the concept of safety that because in group might mean more of these people are quote unquote safe adults, or might mean that they feel safe too. So
Right.
fostering a sense of safety in a communal way is really interesting.
But the
I
interesting thing is, oh, sorry,
no, no,
we
go ahead.
we need to teach children not to talk to strangers, right? Which means that their default is talking to strangers and help them, right? If they ask for help, right? They just go and help. If they consider them as algo members, maybe you're less likely. But their default mechanism, I'm more towards that side. So I'm saying that it's not, it's not scientifically supported, but my speculation is that and just looking at observe our children's behaviors, right? When they see a stranger and they say, "Can you help me?" and then yes, and then they go and help. And I mean, the research show that they more likely to help in-group members, not the out-group members. Then what on earth are they gonna help these strangers from the beginning? And then we have to teach them, don't follow strangers, don't talk to strangers, don't help strangers, right? So I mean, it's an interesting question though. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, given all of this information regarding infants and children, I'm curious if you can give me a sense of some of the adverse experiences that might impact social development in a negative way. So, yeah, and I'm asking this because,
Mm,
we hear that infants in particular and little kids too tend to be resilient
hmm
and that if a behavior is not consistent, if we have a bad day as a parent, it's not going to kill our children, right? But that's at the same time, these young people are making these connections so very early. So, I guess I'm sort of hoping to hear some relief of we're not totally destroying our kids' lives all the time when we have a tough moment or we don't do as well as we hope. So, yeah, can you just say a little bit more about that?
Of course, of course. Children, babies, just think about their lives, right? What they're gonna do, especially for babies, they observe others all the time. But who they can observe is probably most likely their family members. So they learn from them. So I want to start from how important that is, which is against but that's a starting point. We all know it's important, right? So the attachment is important, matters, and then attachment kind of give us kind of like an internal working model how relationship should work. So it kind of like make them to think, not think the behave or determine their behaviors and social relationship later on. So those attachment and then the early experiences really matter. But these are not the only thing, right? They should learn that not always this thing is happy or good. What I always teach my students is that not just showing the good part of you, but the most important thing is how to express the bad things. So not like the content doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. You had a bad day, you are mad, you are get upset. No, of course it's okay. It's totally fine. It's human. We need to tell them it's okay. But the important thing is there's as a role model. What we're gonna do is that how we're gonna express those negative content, negative things, right? So it's hard, but we need to at least try to show when we got upset, the way we show our upsetness is this way, not the other way. So one instant cannot determine everything, and then that they can observe others, and then nowadays they're gonna watch all the social media and others. So maybe as others, maybe it's important to limit the social media content a little bit nowadays, which is uncontrollable nowadays. But I feel a little bit worried, when they are young, right? Before they have their strong kind of like a agenda, not agenda, but mechanism, how relationship will work, and then how I gonna behave and things like that. Before kind of confirming or holding those like a formed kind of mechanism, and they open to exposed to those unexpected. Not the I'm not worried about the parents or the caregivers. I'm more worried about social media these days. So those things, as caregivers, we need to control a little bit. Maybe that's always I'm thinking of. So sorry. I'm not sure whether I answered your question.
No, I think that's really helpful. It's very helpful because I think we do tend to focus and I'm making a broad generalization, but as parents, on our behavior and how we're doing, right? And at some point, the child gets in front of a screen, right? And that can shut off a little bit. It's like, okay, they're not they're doing something else. They're not doing something for me, but that exposure is so incredibly transformative for how brains develop and how we interact. And so that's huge. Um,
Can I add one more
yeah, go
thing?
ahead. Yeah,
Sorry, but
no, okay.
I think the attachment really matters, right? And then I always get a question from my students that sometimes I'm not it's maybe if I do wrong to my child, right? Or, like a one instance, two instance, or like things like that. So what should I do, right? How can I make the good kind of attachments with my like a secure attachment with my baby. Like a the my answer to that question is that you don't need to, especially the working moms, right? Uh, you don't need to stay with your child all the time. You don't need to. That's not necessary. That's not needed. You don't always be smile at your child all the time. It's not possible even, and it's not needed. Whatever is the most important thing to have a secure attachment with a child is, oh, you need to be there when they need to. So that's the moment. When they need, then you need to be there. That's it. You don't need to be stay with your child all the time. But when you think that it's important, then stay there. Okay? That's the like a take home message for me, maybe.
That's really helpful. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's interesting too, connecting it up to something else you said that uh, at a young age, it's understood that harm is not acceptable in a
Hmm.
group, right? Like they have learned that this is not the behavior that deserves reinforcement. That was interesting to me that that is something that they're able to figure out at a really young age that, oh, we're not going to perpetuate that, right?
Right. 11.5 month olds. And even
Yeah.
younger babies, like a 6 month olds, expected when a baby cries, then mom should respond to crying babies. So they have a strong expectation about comforting. So when baby cries, then
Yeah.
mom should be no. But that will depends on their attachment types later. So when they have a secure attachment, they expect an insecure attachment, they're less likely to expect their mom to come. So that kind of shows how experiences are important, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
S Someone in the chat, we have two
Oh
minutes
yeah.
left. This is a great question. Someone in the chat asked, how does separation anxiety play into group and out group evaluation in babies 9 to 18 months?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't think that we have any studies explore those types of questions, like attachment style, how attachment styles influence their understanding of group membership, like social group membership, right? So I'm definitely sure that they should have some influences for sure, but I'm not sure how. So let's say separation anxiety, the separation anxiety. Is it separation anxiety? Sorry. Yeah, separation anxiety. Yeah. So, well, the separation anxiety, honestly, it's kind of like a natural and then very expected behavior throughout their development. So when they create the attachment with their parents, inevitably they have to go through the separation anxiety because they know who is their main caregiver for sure. Then separation anxiety emerge. So in other words, if they do not have like a clear, did not define the clear attachment figure, then they don't, suffer the separation anxiety. So it's a really normal behavior, but I'm not sure how that affect the, group understanding, honestly, because that's more like a towards the, like attachment figure. Usually attachment figure is one, they can make attachment with a lot, but the primary attachment figure should be one. So it doesn't necessarily be mom, but
That's interesting. Yeah, thank you so much. Folks, we are at time, so thank you for your time and
already.
attention, Dr.
Okay.
Choi. I know it goes fast, right? But thank you so
Okay.
much for your wisdom. We really appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you
Folks,
so much.
blessings to you. We hope to see you next month as well. Thank you.